From the Cronkite studios in downtown Phoenix, this is Cronkite News.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Samantha Lomibao. Cronkite News is dedicated to covering issues on our sustainability beat. Tonight, a look back at some of our top stories, from recovering from devastating western wildfires to protecting species at risk of extinction.
One way to cut back on wildfires here in Arizona is to tame the forest. Efforts have been going on for almost a decade, but only a small percentage of the forest have been thinned. Part of this is due to high costs and dependency on the timber industry. I went to Flagstaff to learn more about the efforts. Thinning trees in the woods may not be the most glamorous job in the world, but tree harvester Devin Suarez has wanted to be a lumberman since he was a kid.
I would always play cars with my best friend, and we would pretend that we had a logging company.
Last year, the Forest Restoration Initiative, or FORFRI, hired Suarez to help them thin the forest in northern Arizona. Neil Chapman from the Nature Conservancy is part of this effort.
Without well-informed loggers implementing this work, removing the small diameter trees, we're not going to get to the desired condition that we want on the ground.
Suarez's goal: help prevent wildfires by thinning the forest. This helps keep wildfires from burning fast and hot and from getting close to communities. There's a lot of forest to thin, but it's hard for tree harvesters like Suarez to make a profit. The trees Suarez is contracted by the initiative to harvest are not the most profitable trees. Most are small trees that don't offer much wood.
The small and medium trees that we're removing are just such low value that it requires a whole lot of certainty and time to recover the investment that it takes to build infrastructure like sawmills and logging equipment.
These small payloads also make it difficult to find someplace to process the wood. The closest working lumber mill is more than 150 miles away in Phoenix.
That gets pretty expensive on the shipping costs when we have to deliver that far.
FORFRI is in the early stages of putting together a forest thinning contract that investors can bid on. They hope that this contract will work as a long-term funding solution, providing sustainable local mills to people like Suarez as part of their plan to restore 2.4 million acres of forest over the next several decades.
Our main concern is to prevent homes and other human structures from a severe wildfire that might actually burn some of those things down and threaten life and property. And if the forest is really dense and the fire gets up into the canopy of the tops of the trees and burns really quickly, then it could threaten homes.
While they still have more than 1 million acres to go, over the past 8 years, the initiative has thinned more than 185,000 acres.
It's a very good opportunity to reduce fire risk, where we can maintain the forest for future generations.
The Forest Restoration Initiative's goal is to harvest 50,000 trees a year by 2020. This story is part of a series called Fire in the Neighborhood from Elemental, covering sustainability.
Western states like California and Arizona will likely see an increase in large wildfires in the next 20 years. Families who lost their homes in those devastating wildfires in California are now considering where to rebuild. Cronkite News reporter Emily Four has a story from our Los Angeles bureau.
They're going to tell you, walk out of your house, you've got one little duffel bag, you lock your door, and you never go back.
Suzette and Tom PRIVITELLI remember watching the mountains behind their Ventura County neighborhood being engulfed in flames.
But I could literally see flames coming up.
They never imagined the Thomas Fire, the second largest in California's history, would destroy their home.
It's the hardest part sometimes, like every now and then you just want to go home and you can't.
The Thomas Fire destroyed 1,063 structures in the Santa Barbara and Ventura counties. Unfortunately for those living in the West, a recent study predicts a rise in wildfires within the next 20 years.
Will we see California-type fires in the future? I don't want to be a prophet of doom. I'm a scientist, but I would have to say yes.
Donald Falk, a professor at the University of Arizona, used 35 years of climate and forest fire data to model future wildfire patterns. Falk says he found the years ahead will bring an increase in how much land will burn in the West.
And what we found was, first of all, that the seasonal climate has a really strong imprint on area burn.
That's because the West is experiencing longer fire seasons, which gives wildfires more time to burn. Falk says this is because of climate change.
So When we look at this increase in area burn, we're basically saying this is a climate change effect, and we're already seeing it with a very well-calibrated effect going back the last 30 years.
Falk says as temperatures and drought increase, the landscape becomes more flammable. He says most of the West can continue to expect, on average, bigger wildfires like the Thomas Fire in California. Despite this, Falk says the West is not an unsafe place to live.
We can certainly build and site our developments in areas that would be safe, that would provide ways to get out, and are less likely to be exposed to fire in the first place.
Meanwhile, the PRIVITELLIs are holding out hope while they wait to rebuild their home of 18 years from the ground up.
You can't live your life in complete fear. I'm not going to let this, ruin my life.
Arizona wildfires have burned over 150,000 acres in the past year. More than 1 million acres have burned in California, and that the state estimates the cost to fight those blazes stands at more than $770 million. It's been 1 week since the Camp and Woolsey fires began burning through parts of California, and as firefighters work to control the fires, many people remain missing. The death toll is now 56, and 130 people are still unaccounted for. The Camp Fire has destroyed nearly 9,000 homes, and at least 52,000 people are still evacuated. Cronkite News reporter Emily Forrest in Los Angeles met up with the captain of the Scottsdale Fire Department to find out what his crew is doing to help contain the Woolsey fire.
Captain Al DiBenedetto was in this neighborhood near Thousand Oaks last night. Residents are back in their homes here as DiBenedetto and his crew make sure there's no more threat of fire. So the fire was all over there? Okay.
Yeah, the fire came through this whole area. It hit here, it came down, it bumped, and then you see it did cause the spotting, but also it checked up on this area here where there was no vegetation. But all these hills around here are burned. It's real patchy.
Most of these homes came away from the Woolsey fire with minor damage.
We are their resource to use right now wherever they need us to give them a hand within the state of California.
DiBenedetto has been fighting fires for nearly 40 years. He and his team of 3 other Scottsdale firefighters have been in California since Saturday.
All the Arizona units are working as what we call task forces and strike teams, which is a grouping of 5 like-in-kind units under a common leader with common communications.
He says one of the biggest challenges with the Woolsey fire is dealing with California's winds.
We have the Santa Ana winds, we have onshore winds, we have offshore winds, changing winds, so on. And we are, being from Arizona, we're not really familiar with their wind patterns. So for us, that is a major heads up and a safety factor that we pay very close attention to.
His crew works night and day to locate hotspots in the hills and mountains of Southern California. Local resident, Beta Farrell, says her front and backyards were damaged by the fire.
I mean, it came very close. There's actually almost like a donut of crispiness, like fire, like burnt around our house.
Farrell was lucky. She wasn't home when the Woolsey fire passed through.
We're grateful. We're grateful to these firefighters. We're just grateful we have our home.
Captain DiBenedetto and his crew will be in California for at least a few more days.
Usually these assignments are up to 14 days, and sometimes we can extend as far as 21. We will stay as long as they need us. And if they're done with using us here on the Woolsey and they want us to go to another fire, we'll go to that fire.
The Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management has sent 169 Arizona firefighters and 46 engines to California. Most of them, like the crew from the Scottsdale Fire Department, are working to contain the Woolsey fire. In Los Angeles, Emily Forrest, Cronkite News.
The Woolsey fire has destroyed an estimated 504 structures and is about 52% contained.
It's impossible to predict when and where thunderstorms during Arizona's monsoon will strike. Researchers at the University of Arizona are finding new ways to predict the monsoon's behavior. Cronkite News reporter Jordan Evans found out how digging at the bottom of the ocean could provide some answers.
The North American monsoon is a change in the weather pattern during the summertime for the southwest United States. The skies can change from radiant to rainy in an instant. This pattern change can bring all sorts of weather, from storms to dust, but the monsoon's intensity may be something we can better understand in the future.
In fact, it is in this laboratory at the University of Arizona where researchers have spent years analyzing compounds of mud from the Gulf of California in hopes of finding a connection with the monsoon.
So this is a sediment core, and you can see here that the mud from the seafloor is captured.
Jessica Tierney is a geologist at the University of Arizona. She uses this espresso-like machine to take this mud and turn it into a liquid full of secrets.
What we're looking at are the waxes that are on the leaves of plants. They're preserved for thousands of years in the mud from the Gulf of California. By measuring this chemistry of the plant waxes, we can actually go back in the past and tell you how much summer versus winter rain there was. This is the first study to actually quantify how the monsoon has changed since the last ice age, and that's why it's kind of an unopened book for us.
The research shows the monsoon was much weaker during the last ice age than it is today. She says having the ability to look at the monsoon's behavior with numbers is a new breakthrough, and that's why the research has sparked the interest of other scientists.
If they can go down to deeper layers where it was a warmer period, it was interglacial, something where we had similar kind of CO2 that we have now, and they can see how was the monsoon consistent then? Did it continue? Was it more intense? Was it less intense? That will be very useful information.
Useful information that could open up ideas for other areas of research, like forecasting drought.
I hope that this will be relevant for policymakers. So especially our work that's done here, I think it could be directly relevant for water resource management. If we have a better idea on how the monsoon will behave, can certainly help people in the Southwest plan for future drought.
The research has only made conclusions about the North American monsoon's behavior from about 20,000 years ago, but the hope is to integrate the data with global climate models.
What we're interested in knowing about is how the monsoon is going to change in the future and how we can prepare.
In Tucson, Jordan Evans, Cronkite News.
The team is currently pursuing mud samples from even deeper layers of the seafloor. That could help them understand how the monsoon acted millions of years ago.
Arizona has kept a neurological disease that kills deer and elk out of the state for decades. Yet, chronic wasting disease is prevalent in neighboring states. Reporter Jordan Daphnis explains how Arizona has held the disease at bay.
In Arizona, there are no cases of chronic wasting disease, and Ann Justice Allen wants to keep it that way.
It's a big challenge. It may be an impossible challenge because states that didn't think that they were going to get it have it now, like Montana.
Justice Allen is a veterinarian for the Arizona Game and Fish Department. This month, she's at a youth hunting camp in Greer to test deer and elk for chronic wasting disease.
It affects their brain and their nervous system, so we start seeing abnormal behavior. The animals are somewhat dull and less responsive.
Hunters play a critical role in the Arizona Game and Fish Department's ability to test deer and elk for chronic wasting disease. The animal has to be deceased before they're able to gather samples such as these lymph nodes. 14-year-old hunter Gage Martinez killed one of the elk.
So I was so excited today, my hand was shaking, so yeah, it was pretty weird.
Then Justice Allen and her team cut out the lymph nodes from Martinez's elk. The nodes will be sent to a lab for testing. They are also helping hunters like Martinez understand what chronic wasting disease is.
Talking to hunters, letting them know what we're doing out here, why it's important that we're doing the monitoring project and taking the samples.
So far, Arizona's efforts to test and educate hunters is working, but chronic wasting disease is a problem in nearby states like Colorado.
Last year we did some mandatory sampling that really helped us get a better picture of the prevalence of CWD in Colorado.
Travis Duncan says more than half of the deer herds in his state have chronic wasting disease. He says it spreads quickly when deer are in close contact.
Things like feeding deer is a really good way to spread CWD because it brings a lot of deer all into one area, whereas normally they'd be more spread out.
There is no cure for chronic wasting disease, so Duncan says surveillance and monitoring are key until science can catch up. Here in Arizona, the Game and Fish Department continues to test samples with the help of hunters to ensure there is no trace of the disease.
The hunters value it. They can be assured that the animals here are healthy and that to have them having elk for dinner, venison for dinner is going to be something that's safe for their family and it's not going to be a problem.
Sampling lymph nodes is voluntary for hunters. Justice Allen hopes this testing will keep the disease out of the state. In Greer, Jordan Daphnis, Cronkite News.
Hunters can take deer and elk heads to any Arizona Game and Fish Department location. The department plans to test more than 1,000 animals for chronic wasting disease this season.
Is it endangered or not? That's the question over the round-tailed chub, a type of fish native to Arizona. The Tucson-based Center for Biological Diversity is suing the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for not protecting it. But the Arizona Game and Fish Department says there's no reason to worry. The species is doing just fine.
The round-tailed chub is highly imperiled.
Brian Suggy is the senior attorney for the Center for Biological Diversity. In August, the agency sued the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for not protecting the round-tailed chub as an endangered species. Some threats to the native fish include non-native species of fish, climate change, dam construction, and development around streams.
They were at the point of a proposed listing. They've now withdrawn that listing because of this taxonomic uncertainty, with the round-tailed chub being redefined to now include what was previously known as the Headwater Chub and the Gila Chub.
In 2017, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service said new scientific information indicated 3 species were actually 1. Suddenly, the chub population increased enough that the round-tailed chub was no longer threatened.
It's really hard to distinguish the species. They look very similar. It became increasingly complicated when we were finding new populations of chub to know which they were.
Julie Carter manages the statewide Native Aquatics program for the Arizona Game and Fish Department.
We try to protect existing populations, start new populations, and remove threats.
A hatchery in northern Arizona works to repopulate the state's streams with round-tailed chub.
And we let them spawn naturally every year in this pond. We take out the young of the year in the wintertime once they're big enough to handle a pond harvest. And we take those fish out and stock them into Verde River, into either the main channel or into tributaries of the Verde River.
Depending on the year, hundreds up to tens of thousands of round-tailed chub are sent into streams. The Game and Fish Department says there's no reason to worry about the population going extinct. Regardless, the Center for Biological Diversity wants action.
We just want Fish and Wildlife Service to go back and do another status review and then decide whether or not to issue a proposed rule in a time frame that would be around a year.
The U.S. Department of Justice, which represents the Fish and Wildlife Service, has until next Friday to file a response to the lawsuit. A spokesman for the service said they don't comment on ongoing litigation.
Earlier this fall, 4 California condors were released by the Peregrine Fund at Vermilion Cliffs National Monument. Next month, more condors will be released in California. Cronkite News reporter Emily Four explains these releases are part of an ongoing effort to bring the condors back from the brink of extinction.
I ended up kind of falling in love with it.
Nadia Seal Faith, Conservation and Science Associate for the Santa Barbara Zoo, is reminiscing about California condors. Seal Faith works to understand condors and their nesting habits. By 1987, all 22 condors left in the wild were taken into captive breeding, an attempt to save them from extinction.
It's not only a fascinating species, but it's been a fascinating program to work with.
Through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other organizations like the Ventana Wildlife Society, California condors have since been reintroduced into the wild, and their population is slowly growing.
In fact, this year is really exciting because this year we had a record number of nests in Southern California. There was 12. That's the most of any that we know historically.
Yet, condors are still battling their leading cause of death, lead poisoning. Condors are scavengers and eat the remains of animals killed by hunters.
The only issue is that lead ammunition fragments into many, many, many tiny pieces inside a carcass.
Rachel Wolstenholme manages the condor program at Pinnacles National Park. She says she doesn't want to discourage hunting, but she wants to offer alternatives to lead ammunition.
There's copper bismuth, rifle ammunition. There's also steel shot. If people are using lead shot right now, like in a shotgun, there's steel shot.
But Wolstenholme is hopeful California condors will be taken off the endangered species list in the near future.
I've seen 6 or 7 flying just over the high peaks there. I like to say less than a decade. I actually know we could get there sooner. It's all about making sure that they have a clean food resource.
There are currently 44 California condors managed by Pinnacles National Park. In December, 3 more will be released from this site.
We do what's called a soft release. And so what we do, we'll open the trap door for them so they can leave when they're ready.
Joint efforts and successful releases keep Wolstenholme and Seal Faith motivated.
It's just been so collaborative, and it's so great to see so many people, wanting this bird to succeed. And I think that's just been really special to be a part of.
In Los Angeles, Emily Four, Cronkite News.
2 decades ago, beetles from China and Kazakhstan were released in the Southwest to reduce invasive tamarisk trees. The beetles weren't supposed to come into Arizona because an endangered bird nests in these trees.
But as Cronkite News reporter Rachel Charlton explains, they came to Arizona, and now there's concern that prime habitat for the southwestern willow flycatcher is in jeopardy.
Fighting nature with nature may seem like a good idea until nature doesn't follow the rules. In the late 1990s, a U.S. Department of Agriculture agency, Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, released beetles as a biological control agent. Their target? Tamarisk trees.
The goal of their program was to control tamarisk, reduce it, kill some plants. I don't think they anticipated that it would kill all tamarisk, but that it would reduce its abundance.
Tamarisk leaf-eating beetles strip the non-native tree, also known as salt cedar, of its canopy and kill it. Enter the southwestern willow flycatcher, an endangered songbird that nests in tamarisk trees. The program wasn't supposed to release beetles within 200 miles of tamarisk where flycatchers nest. But beetles don't follow the rules.
In retrospect, it seems pretty clear there wasn't really any type of geographical boundary that would have kept them where they were at.
Beatty is a biologist with the Fish and Wildlife Service in Arizona, and he leads the flycatcher recovery efforts. From the Virgin River in southern Utah into the Grand Canyon and other tributaries, the beetles spread into Arizona, according to Beatty.
It's happened faster than anybody would have expected because we didn't expect them to be here, but it's happened slowly.
The biological control program was terminated in 2010. APHIS declined to comment for this story. But they did provide documents that state that the greater than anticipated natural and intentional human-assisted movement of the beetle caused it to spread into flycatcher habitat.
The primary nesting habitat for the southwestern willow flycatcher is in willow trees in riparian areas like this one here. However, researchers have also found that flycatchers use salt cedar in at least half of their existing territories.
Robin Silver is the co-founder of the Center for Biological Diversity. He says flycatchers depend on foliage to protect the nestlings from the scorching Arizona sun.
And so to denude or to kill that tamarisk right now is really putting too much pressure on the flycatcher for them to be able to survive long term.
And these birds are faithful to their nesting areas.
And with an animal that doesn't move from one area to the next to breed, it's very precarious.
The Center for Biological Diversity successfully sued APHIS in 2013. The ruling found that APHIS did not comply with the Endangered Species Act in the conservation of protected species. And as for the future of the flycatcher,
I think we're going to have greater booms and busts. The status of the population will decline as the beetle expands throughout its range.
In Cottonwood, Rachel Charlton, Cronkite News.
Universities in Arizona are being more sustainable in how they handle food waste and plastic. Northern Arizona University this year banned plastic straws. The alternative? A straw that gets composted. I found out these efforts on campus are also showing up in Flagstaff businesses.
I see all the plastic in the ocean, and I really want to make sure NAU isn't contributing to that.
That's why NAU student Emerald McCormick brought a reusable food container system to campus in January.
A lot of students are really excited for it. That's why we expanded all across campus, because they kept asking for it.
The waste from these food containers doesn't go into the trash. In fact, at least 90% of NAU's dining hall food waste is composted. The waste eventually ends up in piles hidden behind campus.
All that soil just goes back to NAU. So we use it on landscaping, we use it on community gardens, we use it in our greenhouses, it goes to community members, so it's just all recycled back into our community.
The university says composting saves on garbage costs. Last year, more than 300,000 pounds of food waste made it into the compost piles. This year, compostable straws could make that number higher.
It was a pretty easy and small plastic, the disposable plastic that we could get rid of on campus. And also at the same time create a behavior change and get students to start thinking if they really need all of the plastic disposables that they use throughout the day.
That behavior change is spreading to Flagstaff businesses. Laura Diaz is the NAU student pushing for a straw-free Flagstaff.
People are very in tune right now to single-use plastics and the waste that they're creating.
An example of that right here at this coffee shop, where plastic straws aren't available anymore. Coffee goers can get a paper straw and pay a fee for a plastic cup.
NAU is always going to be a really big influence, on all of us, and their ban kind of makes it more known to the students as well, and it kind of just starts to be a normal thing as people go around.
As the new norm takes effect, Diaz hopes to get at least half of Flagstaff businesses on board by 2020.
I really just am looking for some sort of mindfulness around straws. I am not about the plastic straw situation, obviously. I hope to see those eradicated pretty soon.
Jennifer, I also found out that Arizona State University has similar programs in place. Food is composted and straws are not available in dining halls. The University of Arizona didn't respond to our requests for comment in time for the story.
That's it for Cronkite News tonight. Thank you for joining us. For top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.